Hi, it's me, James. Ali and I wrote a fictional story, and it'll be in parts. This first part is called "Did You Hear That?" Albert is a very intelligent student in a class of very intelligent students in his bubble classroom. Most of the students are the sons and daughters of scientists. But unlike Albert, most of his classmates were more interested in playing online games such as Jetball or Hyperchase. Albert thinks those games are childish. After all, he is 10. 6 months ago, Albert and his mom arrived on the planet Mars with a little bit of trepidation or fear. The fears were many. What if the bubble they would be living in wasn't big enough? Or what if the bubble leaked? Would there be enough food on Mars? When they left Earth, Mom was so excited that she would be able to continue her research on how to live on another planet. The flight to Mars seemed to be over quickly. It actually took about 7 months. After boarding the spacecraft, passengers were placed in beds and given something to make them go into a deep sleep. Once covered by a type of lid, their bed would only open once they landed. Landing on Mars had been very cool. Looking out the XR-7 landing craft window, Albert could see hundreds of bubbles on the surface. But they weren't completely round. They were half bubbles with the flattened side on the surface. Mom explained that the bubbles had air that they could breathe, water they could drink, and gardens of vegetables and fruit they could harvest. She warned that there wasn't any meat to eat on Mars because of the difficulty in supporting animals in the bubbles. Her job was to figure out how to raise chickens and eggs on the planet. In fact, she had brought a dozen live hens and a couple of roosters with her. Maybe they would be able to have eggs in the near future. Time passed. Now, having lived on Mars for 6 months, they'd had their first egg, and it was delicious. Apparently, it took the chickens more time than expected to settle in after their flight from Earth. Albert became more interested in what it was like outside the bubble. He knew it was very cold and the air was very poisonous. He also knew he would be lighter outside. The bubbles had taken care of all those problems. Although it had taken years of expeditions, lots of failures, and many years of work to complete. Still, the idea of exploring the outside was always on his mind. Although the bubbles were all interconnected, allowing him to go to the bubble school, help Mom with her research in one of the many research bubbles, go with her mom to the many gardens, a trip he most enjoyed, and visit the bubble library, his second favorite bubble. He longed to go outside. Ever so often he would get a glance of the explorers, Mom had called them, taking trips on their rovers out into the vast areas of Mars. Albert was so curious about what was beyond the bubbles that he talked about nothing else with his friends. His friends didn't seem all that interested, and pretty soon Albert was by himself most of the time. He didn't seem to mind. Besides, he had inventions to build. His first invention seemed pretty simple. Building it took some time, but it was worth it. If Albert ever got outside, he would need a tool that helped him pick up souvenirs or samples of the Mars surface. Since he would be in a bulky spacesuit, he knew he wouldn't have much flexibility. His design for a pickup device was patterned after a toy he had back on Earth. He had made a long stick with a handle, then inserted a wire from the handle to the shovel on the end that had an opposing thumb, which could grab the sample. Brilliant, he thought. What else would he need for his adventure outside the bubble? It was during one of those thinking times, always done while lying on his bed with his eyes open, looking at his hologram of Earth on the ceiling, when he thought he heard a noise. Albert looked around the room but couldn't see anything. His eyes went back to the hologram. What if I built a... Albert thought, but was interrupted by another noise. Scratch, scratch, came the noise. What was that? Albert wondered. Was there something or someone in his bedroom? Or was it on the outside? Scratch, scratch. The noise repeated. Getting out his pencil flashlight, Albert scoured the room, but nothing. Was he hearing right, he thought? Maybe he was spending too much time alone in his room. Scratch, scratch. There, he thought. It was coming from the corner where the hologram was plugged into the mini solar panel. Scratch, scratch. Yes, he was sure of it. Albert slowly climbed off his bed to his hands and knees and slowly crawled towards the corner. What if there was nothing there? Did that mean he was showing signs of bubble fever, he thought? Some of the older kids were saying that if you stayed too long on Mars, you might start hallucinating or seeing or hearing things that weren't there. He hoped that he wasn't getting bubble fever. Scratch, scratch. Nope, definitely something in that corner. Even more slowly, he lowered his body and slid towards the sound. Scratch, scratch. Gotcha, he thought. His flashlight zeroed in on a tiny mouse-like creature with purple eyes. But just a minute. The eyes weren't where eyes usually were. They seemed to be a few inches above his, was it a he or she, head. Looking more closely, the eyes seemed to be suspended in mid-air. How was that possible? And the color of the eyes were changing. Now they were blue, now yellow. What was Albert looking at? And its feet, they were huge, the size of Albert's own feet. Yes, its body was the size of a mouse, but it had no legs. The feet came from right outside the bottom of its body. Its face, if you can call it that, was a smaller but similar shape to its body. But it had no facial features other than a small hole in the middle. Was that its eye or nose? Albert blinked twice. Yeah, still there. Albert closed his eyes and counted to 30. Opened them. Still there. And strangely, the creature didn't seem to be frightened of Albert, at least not that he could tell. And almost magically, 2 little hands appeared outside of his body and began scratching on the outside of the bubble. Scratch, scratch. And the arms quickly disappeared once again. Strange, Albert said half out loud. And then Albert thought, I wonder whether it's thinking of me, or can it even think? Albert and the creature kept staring at each other for what seemed like hours. Albert was thinking about how he could communicate with the creature. And was it thinking the same? Finally, Albert grew tired, and as hard as he tried to stay awake, fell asleep right there on the floor. While he slept, he dreamed of riding around Mars with his new friend with the multicolored eyes. Strapped to a dune rover, they skimmed around Mars at breakneck speed. And just as they were approaching a new crater, Albert woke up, opened his eyes, but his new friend, was he a friend? Was gone. Had there really been a creature there? Was he simply dreaming? No, it had to be real. There were scratch marks on the bubble surface where the creature had been standing. Would he come again? Was he really a friend, or was he an enemy? Albert just had to find out.